So I have no prepared notes of any sort. That said, Weisinger, the cause of all my troubles. I have no prepared notes of any sort. I only began thinking about what I was going to say. Actually, I thought about it a couple nights ago, and then I changed my mind about 20 minutes ago. What my presentation may lack in eloquence, I hope it makes up in honesty. First, I'd like to thank Orly and Uvi for the conversation. The idea for me speaking occurred in a conversation between me and Uvi one night at her Shabbos table, and I relished a chance to crack up a bunch of jokes about my terrible disease. I'd like to thank Orly for giving me the chance to speak, and my previous speakers, Yitzi, and I'd like to commend the person in front of me whose name I did not catch. I have Aspergers. Speech, and I would like to cordially invite any Shadchanim who are down for that on a one-way ticket to hell. I'm sorry if that was inappropriate. I have Asperger's. So, before I get into what Asperger's is, let's start this in the middle of a story. This story begins, as so many great Woody Allen movies begin, in a therapist's office. I'd like to applaud all three of you who got that joke. And I had been going to therapy for some time. For a little bit I had been in group therapy, which I loved, because you can get away with saying anything in group therapy. Because what's the worst they'll do? They think you're crazy? That's why you're there. Seriously, I used to go around and ask everybody their name, and I decided to indulge in a little humor, and they'd come to me and they go, what's your name, man? And I go, hello. I'm Akiva Weisinger, and I like to torture kittens. That's very nice. Let's move on to the next person. This is rather like group therapy in that way. I can't say anything. But I eventually moved on to individual therapy, and things were apparently going well. And they were having a panel on Asperger's, in which they would ask a bunch of kids with Asperger's questions, and and she wanted to know, the therapist I was going to wanted to know if I would care to participate. I said, sure, fine. What would be involved in this? And like, answering a question, which I'll prepare. She wanted me to answer the question, how do you present yourself as somebody who has Asperger's? I said, okay, I gave an answer, and she was like, well, that's a good prepared answer. That's good for our purposes. Are you going to say, would you say anything that, and are you going to say anything that would be offensive to anybody? No. No, why would you ever think that? You know, I know you have trouble sometimes with figuring out what is appropriate and what is not. I just want to make sure. Yeah, I'm not stupid. No. Right, so I arrived at the panel, and there's a whole presentation on Asperger's and the various things, which I guess I'll summarize after the story is over. And the first question is to me. And they say, our first speaker is Akiva Weisinger. Akiva, how do you present yourself as someone with Asperger's? And I say, hi, I'm Akiva. I look over at the PowerPoint presentation beside me, look back at the crowd, look back at the PowerPoint presentation, look back at the crowd. And apparently, I have Asperger's. You know, laugh happens, fine. So this is a story within a story. I'm killing two birds with one stone right here. I'm telling a story about me telling a story, and I'm going to tell a story now. I know, it's blowing your mind. It's crazy. So as an example of presenting yourself with Asperger's, I was applying to a school in Israel for after high school. And there were two schools I was interested in. One was a smaller school, one was a larger school. My parents were leaning towards having me at the larger school, and we went to a town hall meeting about the larger school. And they came back from it and said, no, I'm not going there. I'm like, why not? And they said, well, we're speaking to one of the rebbe there, and we asked a question based on you. Like, what if there's somebody who wants to spend most of his time in the library and reading books and doesn't want to like actually go to shiur and whatever? What would you do about such a kid? And they replied to my parents that somebody who is not very social and doesn't make eye contact is not going to be accepted into the is going to be weeded out of the decision-making process. So I'm telling this story at an Asperger's panel to remind you what I'm. And one of the symptoms of Asperger's is an inability to make eye contact. In fact, I've never been able to make eye contact. People have noticed this. What I've gotten very good at over time is actually being able to stare straight past a person, though then thinking that I am making eye contact with them. You see, am I making eye contact with you? No, I'm not. I'm staring at the wall behind you. It's a neat trick, isn't it? Right? So I'm at this Asperger's panel and I'm trying to find an analogy, trying to really exemplify how tough it is for me to make eye contact. At last, I hit upon one. See, he knows what's coming. And I say, I don't know how much you guys know about Asperger's, but making eye contact for me is about as difficult as asking Christopher Reeve to get out of a wheelchair. Which is difficult for him because he is paralyzed and now dead. Gas goes from the crowd. My mother took a video of it. It's on YouTube. There's just gas. And I'm looking out at the crowd. I don't know how this is suave. This is some suave stuff. Look out at the crowd and I just go, see, I have Asperger's. I can get away with that joke. So, to finish up the story that I was saying at the Asperger's panel, I finish that later. What is Asperger's? Asperger's, I would describe as, I don't really understand other people. Which makes it difficult to describe my experience with it, because number one, it's an entire personality, so I don't really know so much where my personality begins and ends, and what are symptoms. For example, one of the symptoms of Asperger's is very narrow interests and very obsessive going after those interests, like you really like baseball, and then you read everything you can about baseball, whatever. For years, I just accepted that as part of my personality. I'm interested in things. I research things. Then I found out that's not like a part of your personality. That's actually a symptom, which I'm fine with. Last I checked, that was called work ethic. But yeah, I don't really know. But then other people are like, I'm also interested in things. People are interested in things, but to me, it's like a compulsion. I need to find out everything about a subject once I'm interested in it. It's not like I could, just, I sort of understand what's going on here. No, I need to know every single thing about a subject. Recently, I've taken to when I'm eating something, reading the Wikipedia article about the subject on my phone. I don't know if this sounds weird to anybody, but I do that. It's interesting. There's all kinds of fascinating things in Wikipedia. It's great. Yeah, and the other thing is that in order to understand something, you need to understand how it's different from other things. And I don't understand other people. That's part of the definition of Asperger's. I really just don't understand how other people work. You don't really process body language at all. You're not really, first of all, because you're not making eye contact, you're not really looking at people's faces. And once you're looking at people's faces, you're like, what's a big deal? Because you can't process any facial expressions really well. You eventually learn that this is good and this is bad, but it takes a while. And then all the subtle things in between, it's really hard to figure out. I don't really understand how people work and how to understand that other people are thinking things. To me, my mind makes sense, everybody else doesn't make sense. Which sounds horrible, but that's really how I view things. I try my best to try and figure out how other people are working and to really try, but it takes a lot of effort to do so. And social situations are pretty much hell. Because it's pretty much like being dropped into a location which you are completely unfamiliar with, and not being handed a map and go find this, go find this address. There are no street signs, there are no anything. There's nothing telling you where to look. And considering the dire implications of a social mess up, it's rather more like you were dropped into the middle of a nuclear power plant in a foreign country with all the buttons and lights and whatever, and like, okay, try to make sure it doesn't melt down. I have no idea how to do that at all. So I guess I'm sort of standing before you today as an Asperger's success story because I'm generally considered normal by people, and people are generally surprised. People don't look at me like, actually they kind of do. Fair point, sir, fair point. But people don't normally see me as so out of it, I guess. But it's a question of how you deal with it. Once you have no idea what's going on, I guess you have two choices. You could decide you're just going to go ahead, plow ahead, and not really care. Which means that you're impervious to feeling bad about yourself because you don't understand why you feel bad about yourself. That means you insult people and offend people and hurt people, but you don't understand why. And I prefer not to do that because I don't want to hurt people. The other hand, so the other option, which I've taken, is to try and do your best to get along with people and figure out, like, why is it when I say this person becomes upset? And so on and so forth. But what then happens is you just start to overanalyze situations because you're not going on instinct. You're not going on, this is what this means. You're just, I think this is what it means. I don't know what it means. I think they're okay with me. I'm not sure. So you're never really 100% confident that everything you're doing is correct, or that you're not hurting somebody when you're saying something. And what this will often lead to is the fact or what usually happens with me is I just sort of not do things. It's more safe to sit on the side of a social situation than to actually risk doing something, risk hurting somebody, risk offending somebody, risk being cast out or whatever. You don't want to get involved in anything, really, because you don't know how it's going to, you don't know at all how it's going to affect other people. Now, take social situations, which I've already said is pretty bad, and then relationships. Bad, very bad, no, very bad. In a classic story of Asperger's, like many kids, I went out with a girl in high school, and I distinctly remember one time that she called me up and was like, "Hi, Akiva, I love you." And my reaction was like, "Cool." I hung up the phone and I think she might have posted on my Facebook wall that she hated me. I think we made a half hour later. I don't know. I just remember that being like, oh, well, that's how Asperger's works. But then, not even when you're in a relationship, when you're trying to figure out if people like you, you have no idea. You have literally no idea how to interpret social cues. You have no idea how to interpret hits. You have people could hit on you constantly, and you have no idea what's going on, and you could completely misinterpret somebody's actions and think that they like you, and it doesn't work at all. There is nothing worse in the world than finding out that somebody who you thought liked you doesn't actually have any idea who you are. It's bad on so many levels. So yeah, and those things. Well, in my life now, I'm pretty happy. I have friends. I'm dating a girl who's fairly awesome. She's somewhere in this room.
Right here! She's here with you! I love attention.
You're okay with this, aren't you?
It's okay.
I have Aspergers. But like all those things don't go away. It doesn't go away simply because you're friends now, or it doesn't go away because you're dating somebody now. None of these things go away. I still don't know what people. I still don't know what people mean in all these social situations. I'm just guessing. I don't know if everything I'm doing is correct. I don't know if I've somehow screwed up something along the lines that somebody is going to get offended by. I've previously insulted somebody. For the longest time, I used to stay away from funerals, because that is such a high pressure trigger situation. I just don't want to get involved at all, because I could totally say the wrong thing, and that's bad. So that's really just, we talk about stigma a lot, and we view it mostly as an external thing. That I don't like the stigma put on eating disorders, or I don't like the stigma put on whatever. More dangerous, I think, is the stigma you put on yourself, and viewing yourself solely as like somebody with Aspergers, somebody who doesn't know what's going on. Regardless of how many insecurities I have friends. People like me. I have to keep telling myself that, and I don't quite believe it all the time, and I don't quite understand it all the time, but I still accept it anyway. My attitude towards my friends and family, whatever, is a lot like Kierkegaard's attitude towards God. I just sort of have accepted the absurd for what it is. I'd like to applaud all 4 people who got that joke. I've gone from Woody Allen to Kierkegaard. I'm all over the place tonight. All right, so yeah, we have very narrowly defined interests and don't often understand when people don't get the jokes that we're making. It's crazy. Who does that? And now I'll complete the story that I was talking about before. When I went to that interview with the same rabbi who told that to my parents, that they wouldn't accept somebody who wouldn't make eye contact, which is Aspergers. That's basically what that is. He knew what he was talking about, I'm pretty sure. He was basically saying we won't accept people with Aspergers, which is, it's crazy that an Israeli Yeshiva would discriminate based on mental illness. And yeah, you were talking about that before. I was just like, damn, he stole my story. Oh, man. So I sat down at the interview with him and answered questions and so on and so forth. At the end, he said, "Do you have any questions for me?" I said, "Yes." You said in a question and answer session with my parents that if somebody did make eye contact in the interview, you would not allow them into the yeshiva. Could you explain how my lack of eye contact disqualifies me from attending your yeshiva? He looked really taken aback for a second, which is really gratifying. Gathered his composure. He said, well, somebody who doesn't make eye contact might not, be a challenge verbatim on points or be an active force in class and be intellectually daring. And I'm like, stop right there. I'm sorry. That's not me. I've never had a problem with being too shy in class. In fact, quite the opposite. There are stories. ask one, right? And I've always took pride in like being the first one to raise their hands. Yes, in a social situation, I'm going to stand back in the corner and hope nobody comes over to me. But in class, I'm going to, be a vicious piranha and attack as soon as I can. I basically don't use your diagnosis as a personality test. Don't view Asperger's as just what defines you, because if you let that define you, then that's basically saying that like I'm just going to be, this model definition. But the thing is, there is no model definition of Asperger's. A lot of people think that Asperger's is like the first person to discover Asperger's or make the diagnosis for Asperger's noticed that there were like a bunch of little kids in his practice that were very smart. He called them little professors. And that little professors thing is what most people view Asperger's. He's like guys who don't have any social interaction, but they're like really good at math, whatever. I'm very bad at math. I don't have any organization to be good at math. I just get very caught up in the things that I'm interested in. A very good representation of what Asperger's is Abed from Community. They do a very good job on that. Seriously, like I've cried during a couple of those episodes. It's like, oh come on, people, laugh, come on. But there's no typical definition of Asperger's. You decide what your personality is, and it basically comes down to social deficits, whatever, and you do your best to come up with that. It's hard. I don't really have a solution as to how we deal with people with Asperger's. I don't think that just because somebody has Asperger's, he should be given carte blanche to insult anybody he wants. And well, he has Asperger's. As much as I made a joke of that during my presentation, I don't think that's a good excuse. But at the same time, like, I often don't realize when I do that. I guess some understanding would be necessary, but I don't want to be treated like a diagnosis rather than a person. I want to be treated like a person because that's what I am. One of the symptoms for Asperger's is a lack of ability to do public speaking. I think I'm doing just fine. If I may say so. Sorry.
You're fine.
Yeah, okay. So you can't let it define you. You can't let your diagnosis become your personality. And that's basically been my experience with Asperger's, and I don't really have an inspiring message to end off on, but I hope that I've given you a better understanding of what people like me go through.